We are in for another episode of AyAyAyAi. I mean, this is me being very excited because the guest we have today will drop so many use cases on us today, which he has done already with me in a one-on-one conversation. But he has so much to talk about with AI machine learning because he's an evangelist. He advocates for machine learning and AI, and he does it with that positivity of breaking things down for people with logistics, with supply chain, with what's possible, right? Managing that expectation of AI. What do you expect to come for next 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road, right? Um, Look, this conversation is going to be amazing. I am just super thrilled. With that, Ben, let's make an introduction.
Okay. Ay, ay, ay. Where to start?
So much to talk about.
I'm Ben Taylor. I'm the chief AI strategist for Data IQ, but I've been bouncing around the AI world for. I have to keep adjusting the number, right? Because we get older. I think I say 18 years now, machine learning. Because I fell in love with it right away. It's the coolest thing. Like it's like magic, and the potential of this magic keeps expanding. And I like to tell people there's a window of science fiction that anything you think is actually hard science fiction is readjusted every couple decades. Something that you would say can't happen is happening, which I think is exciting.
Lucky.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It feels like there is some kind of magic in AI and sometimes like it gives you a feeling like my feeling is I. But like okay, so like I look at the small things in life, and then you just think about it in a big way. And so like the little series that we have, the little voices now that are telling us how to manage life, those are the new technologies that make things really different. And really, learning from you today, from a subject matter expert, we want to know. I want to know, you know, in AI, what projects have really changed your perspective that really like made you like, wow, this stuff here is magic. What projects have you worked on that really changed your perspective? Not lately, but over all your experience, have really changed the way you looked at AI. That something that like really said, wow, this stuff is magic.
Hmm. I I think when I think of magic, it's more some of the new themes and technologies that are coming out, like when Docker first came out, when Kubernetes first came out, when deep learning first came out, when it was generators first came out, which is so funny because when you go back in time and look at the first faces from generators, they were terrible. You're like, I think that's a face. And now now you have these generative art models. I worked on automatic speech recognition when I was at HireVue. Like, so speaking and having a computer being able to consume that is super exciting. And then I built maybe one of the more impressive specific ones was when I joined HireVue. They had millions and millions of video interviews of people getting jobs at Fortune 100 companies. And so one of the first initiatives, I was their chief data scientist for 4 years. So one of the first initiatives was to build predictive models to predict from a 20-minute video of you interviewing at a large bank or a large airline, how did you do on that 20-minute video interview based on everything you said, all the data in the interview. And at the time, there were people that didn't think it was possible. It's definitely possible. And I think there is that theme now. If a human can see it, if a human can do it when it comes to detection, there's a really good chance that AI can as well. The AI can be competitive. There are some examples where AI really struggles compared to people.
Yeah, yeah. I would say I guess the body gestures and the inflection of the voice and stuff like that. You figured that would be easy, or that would be hard. That you figured, wait a minute, that would be hard to detect. But then you figure with sound, and then you can see the sound waves. Maybe it is easy to detect and be able to use something like some technology to be able to analyze video. You just really have to break it down.
And I think you lean into the feature set. So how rich is this feature set? If I'm trying to build a predictive model on big five competencies or something, I don't have a lot there. It's going to be a weak model. But if I have your raw audio and you speaking, and what is your cadence, what are the keywords that you're saying, how are you delivering that. The ability for those models to predict well did depend on the size of the data set, the quality of the performance data, and the job family. So it's much easier to predict a customer facing job than it is to predict a data scientist. It Which brings up this theme of how do you evaluate anyone for a job? And their different jobs have different competencies or inputs or features. And so an engineer that never smiles or is not very friendly and has poor communication can still be a great asset on a team, depending on their technical competencies and other things that they can demonstrate through HackerRank or some of these coding assessments. So if you're we also did analysis on code, which was funny. So we noticed themes during the coding assessment. There were 13 different languages. You can pick whatever you want. PHP, Python, Bash, C++, C#. You pick the language to solve the coding challenge. And there was a pretty consistent theme. If you're using a language that's more up to date, you tend to do better. So if you intentionally use Python 3.6 at the time, I forgot, versus 2, that distribution was shifted. But the distribution that I'll never forget, this goes back to a sampling error. So which language do you think was the most performant? Like if you had to pick a language that, anyone who uses that is a genius. I'm just curious what you would say. I'll tell you the answer, but
R?
it wasn't R. It was
Okay. C++. That's my second guess.
It was Bash. So if you decide to tackle a coding challenge in raw Bash, you're like a legend. Like there weren't very many people. So like I think it was like the 5 or 10 people that decided to use Bash. They did really well. So obviously that isn't that's not really a valid model. If you decide to select Bash and start going, it doesn't mean you're going to do well. But that was a funny sampling error.
Yeah, the Bash definitely has some nuance that you have to know about, and it didn't, like, starting with hash and numbering things 1, 2, and 3, 4. Is that the Bash one, the one that you have to like number things using 1, 2, and 3, 4, and all that?
No, is a Bash more like it's like
The
Linux command
script?
line.
Yeah,
If
Yeah,
you
it's
can
Linux
imagine
command
it,
line.
it's like Linux command line.
Is that the same one? Is that the same
Yeah,
Bash?
I taught Bash at Divergence, and one of the challenges was you had to you had to sit there and create a Bash script that would scan an entire it scanned through an iteration of IP addresses, and my challenge to the class was who can make it into one line.
Yeah.
You're talking about 15, 20 lines into one line. And at the end of the class, I would show everybody what it was, and no one would ever get it because at the end, you would, like he says, you have to be the man to know every single secret command line bash parameter to be able to do things like that. And there is ways of doing it. You just got to be old school, and you have to really know your way around bash.
Yeah. You just reminded me, Lucky, of a particular consultant I worked with when I worked at a high performance computing hedge fund as a quant, and we brought in these HPC consultants. So they would rewrite all your code to raw CUDA or OpenMP from MATLAB. So you'd have things that were very high performant, and then they would just rewrite from scratch. And this particular company, they would not allow their employees to use a mouse pad. You had to use all Vim or all Emacs shortcuts for everything. Like they demanded it. And I remember watching this individual program, and I can't even keep up with he's actually editing code, doing code blocks, like slapping them around between screens and different things. And I would love to tell you that I'm that competent, but some part of me wishes someday I will be, because I used to do a lot of programming, just in the shell, in Vim. That was kind of my go-to, because I was usually remoted into these bigger systems in data centers.
Your skill sets that you bring to the table. I mean, look, have you ever heard of Indian food called biryani, which is rice mixed with everything else that can go with rice?
Oh, I'm pretty sure I've had it, because my wife we're big fans of Indian food.
So if you eat biryani, it's like rice mixed with all the things in the world: chicken, meat,
Yeah.
spices, vegetables, eggs, fried rice, but with more stuff on it. Um, I think that's so important in machine learning and AI. But when you're telling the story about AI machine learning, why an executive should look into this topic and why an executive should make a decision and how to help that executive come up with a vision and some landmark goals in between that vision to get to that vision. Your expertise is super, super important. I think that is very well in demand for, and I'm super thrilled to hear your experience on these levels of engaging with executives. Like, what it is that you tell an executive, not behind closed doors, but in general, that how does that conversation go? What are some of the things that you uh, give them for them to understand, like, look, that IT system that you've been so frustrated with the last 50 years, and now the next 10 years of IT will go in AI machine learning route. How do you tell the story? How do you make it visual for them so they can understand it without any whiteboard or drawing, or just straight up use case proof of concept, right? What do you tell them? Like, how does the conversation go?
I'll break it down how I normally approach these conversations with executives, but I do want to back up and say that I did not always know how to communicate with them. So when I was the chief data scientist at HireVue, I was coming out of the hedge fund. I would make an argument that I ran HireVue like a quant, or like we're alpha chaser. I ran it like a hedge fund. I didn't care what our competitors were doing. I just cared what we were going to be doing next, 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 next. And I had plenty of awkward interactions when I was at HireVue with our CEO. I remember I got in there first couple months. I'm digging through the databases, pulling data down, and doing some analysis. And I think 2 months in, I found some lift that I thought was pretty exciting. It seemed like it was mapping to value. And I sent a plot to the CTO and CEO, and the CEO responded very quickly and said, "What the hell am I looking at?" And my email had excitement around it, that this is good news. Look what I found. And I remember being a little put off, thinking, "Oh, geez, there's a nicer way to say that." Or, um, and then I was in a meeting once. I think it was an hour-long meeting, which is embarrassing. And I'm walking them through what we've been working on recently, and I'm embarrassed to say I showed them 2 or 3 failed iterations, because you're trying to show, like, we did this and it didn't work, we did this and it didn't work, and then you're ultimately getting to the fourth, that you're trying to, like, show your level of competency, or your level of diligence. And I remember during that meeting, Mark, the CEO, interrupted me and he said, "Ben, we know you're smart. That's why we hired you. Please stop reminding us." But the way he said it, it was a problem. It was not a compliment.
Mm.
Right.
And I understand now. So one of the things I was doing is I enjoyed educating anyone in the audience about some of the statistical jargon, that, oh, this is an AUC chart. This is why this is so incredible. Or, oh, let me explain one more thing. And I think at the time I thought if I could upskill them with little breadcrumbs, within a year we'd have this very fluid AI conversation. And and that's very naive, because what I did not realize, if you want to influence an audience, you need to understand who they are. You need to understand their world. And I did not understand the nightmare of what it means to be a CEO, where you're
Gotcha.
managing payroll at this level, you've got board meetings coming up. And then when I went and did my own startup, co-founded a startup with David Gonzalez and sold it to Data Robot after 3 years, I appreciate everything about running a business.
Right.
So now when I meet with an executive, I have the technical pedigree, but now I can communicate where they see urgency and they see value. And so the way most AI talks with exec, now I'll break down how I enjoy talking with execs. Most AI talks that execs receive are poor. They're terrible. And the way they come about is it's a tidal wave of jargon and
Mhm.
knowledge gap filling that they don't care about. And the outcome of that meeting is there's no urgency. It's nice to have, and maybe next year we'll review again. And it was failed communication. So when I meet with execs, I like to talk about current problems they have. No, so I can have a pretty engaging conversation with execs, and I don't even talk about AI. I just talk about, a business is made up of processes. Processes involve people and data. if I audited your business, especially for a larger organization, I would find a lot of processes that are stale. They haven't changed. They haven't evolved for 10 years, 20 years, never. Now let's actually ask why. Well, it could be a few reasons. People are too busy. Process owners are too busy to fix the process, or the consequence of change is significant. Like think of like an underwriting approval process for an engineering. You can't just change that process. That you don't know what the downstream effects are. So stale process is an issue, and then the other issue is you have knowledge workers. So I remember when I was a junior chemical engineer at Intel Micron, you realize that school has not prepared you very well for the real world, and so you don't want to ask stupid questions, but you want to try to come across as being competent. There's that insecurity. You run into outlier situations where you don't know what to do. So I'm in the fab, something's going wrong. I don't know what to do. And thank goodness there's this senior engineer or principal engineer. And then eventually I become the senior principal engineer where I know what to do because
Right.
I've done it before, but then I
Right.
leave the company. So what happened with that knowledge? And so when executives realize that processes are stale, knowledge is lost on a regular basis, and just like experience is spooling up in their workers, they have data, which is also their experience, but they're not leveraging it. They're not using it. And then now they're ready to start listening to the AI conversation about how AI um, it'll evolve their process. It'll allow them to innovate, allow them to make better decisions. But one of the things I didn't break down is it's really important to succeed on an emotional opener because otherwise it's just a pitch and people are used to pitches and they've got these invisible walls up. But if you can have a powerful emotional opener, that will break down those walls. It can eliminate them pretty quickly. And then you can get into the conversation about how you're going to deliver value in the next couple quarters.
Yeah, it's tough trying to deliver what AI is or explain how you're going to solve a problem, and you watch their eyes. You can't see them, but you can feel their eyes start to roll back in the back of their head, and they don't have any obvious questions, and their energy doesn't match your energy on the phone. That's when you're like, okay, um, let's start this over. Okay, let's draw a picture. And
Yeah.
let's figure out how we can make this picture clearer to you. And I'm not talking stick figures. I'm talking
Right.
seriously. Let's draw a picture that you can understand, because what I'm talking about now, the technical robot computer thing that I'm putting together right now, doesn't make any sense. And I've had those feelings. Matter of fact, I had a discussion with my team just yesterday about AI, and I felt my team lead's eyes start to roll back in the back of their heads, and I was like, okay, let's stop. We're only going to know you're only going to know or gain trust or gain that level of experience once you get your hands on it. So let's just quit talking about it. In the next few weeks, we're going to get we're going to get our feet wet, and we're going to jump in. And then that's when the excitement started to build. But me talking about it, just forget about it. There's no point. You really, it depends on, obviously the individuals and the scope. But when you're talking to executives, it's almost like you can take a technical 20 point or 20-page PowerPoint presentation and just shrink it down to one or two PowerPoint slides, and that will get the point across to executives. At least my experience. Try to keep it
Yeah.
short.
Yeah. And will be respectful of their time. Their
Yeah.
time and attention is quite valuable. And they're depending on you to make some key decisions. So I remember I think I showed when I was at HireVue, I'm showing these executives this model, and is the performance good enough to turn it on? Like it's almost like I'm leaving that conversation to the room, but they hired me for a reason. So hindsight, I'd be like, I recommend we turn it on, but we don't expose it to customers, but we run it for a few weeks and then we do the ROI calculation. Um, you have to take ownership and um, the more you try to get partial credit for your work or the more you try to add confidence bounds and different things like that on your models, the less confidence the executives have in your work, which is interesting because at the time I thought, look at all this smart stuff that we're doing. Isn't this great? And I think the big elephant in the room that most data scientists completely miss is urgency. An urgency that's defensible. So on a regular basis, I'll hear stories about data science teams being let go, and I would argue they weren't able to get the dotted line to the business that justified their burn. Data scientists are expensive, and innovation in data science as a nice to have is only nice to have when things are going well. But eventually, people, CFOs, and different people come in and make these decisions, and I blame the data scientists, or really the data science managers. I've had data scientists work on my team that are deep tech, where you don't want them to talk to a customer, you don't want them to present to an executive, but they still are a very useful member of the team. They provide really helpful insight, but you have to herd them, you have to task them to keep on task.
I think organizationally speaking, my number is 20% of the people will do 80% of the work.
Oh yeah, completely
And that
agree.
does not mean those 20% needs to be in front of everybody. Otherwise, they're not doing all the work because there's people that are super valuable, but they have to do what they have to do. And you just have to breed that connection between people that will take this out into the world and sell it, right? And that's their task. And so the organization has always this, product development, and then you have sales team, and in between that you have the administrative operations, right? So having those three separated but working together in sync is very, very important. Very uh, very well greased machine, right? That's able to operate off of each other's energy and understanding, the level setting of understanding that sales team understand machine learning as much as they need to in order to sell, so they can speak emotionally to the executives, and then the product developers are actually in sync with the sales team, so they're able to continuously upgrade them with the new and latest development that's happening on their side of the operation. So um, when we are discussing these technology to the people that are not developing this technology, I find that you know between what we used to do, what we're so used to, which is a software development using coding and programming language, to now with AI, we'll have to have everybody actually become very well aware of how machine learning works, level set that, right? Level set that within an organization. So to have these discussions with an executive and have the same discussion with somebody who's might be an HR, like a business process owner, doesn't necessarily have to be the CEO of the organization, but any business process owner, any data owner that is not super technical, they will not develop any AI, machine learning, or code program, or throw stuff in GitHub, right? These individuals' feedback is super important, because when it comes to software, you saw a pain point and you solved it with coding and programming language, right? But when it comes to AI and machine learning, the human in the loop, using these other part of the organization to be on that table, to have that conversation, to have that emotional engagement to the topic of, like, look, this is next 10 years of your organization's ability to sustain and scale itself. Because if you're not, there's somebody else who doesn't even exist at this point will come and eat your lunch, right? Because that's the kind of Netflix and blockbuster type of situations that we will see for years to come. Because a lot of the organizations are not even well positioned to pivot into AI machine learning, right? And yet there'll be a startup that will just come and say, look, everything you have done, I literally can do that with AI machine learning and do it for much cheaper, which is 90% of the service with 10% of the cost, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just want to throw that in there. I really don't have any question here.
Well, I have a reaction listening to you. So I think lots of thoughts are flowing through. So one of my reactions listening to you is there are insecurities that exist in most companies. I would say most tech companies. But I'm going to expand that
Of course,
to
of
most
course,
large companies. So think of Fortune 100 companies.
of course.
They're actually, most of them are very insecure about the interview questions that they ask when they're onboarding people. A lot of the questions are just kind of, they're they're not that defensible. Like they're just kind of coming together from different individuals at different times. And if you ask, why are you asking this question? What is it measuring? They don't have a good answer to that. The other insecurity that a lot of companies have is around innovation. Most companies, I would argue, do innovation poorly. So innovation, there's some interesting themes or stereotypes that exist with different types of functions. So innovation can tend to be academic and it's siloed and it's disconnected from the business. But I think throughout the business, you can have a lot more accountability. So if, let's pretend the three of us were competing on separate whiteboards to come up with three really big AI ideas or innovation ideas. It doesn't have to be AI. and we're done. We have our ideas, and they are all incredible. Who has the better idea? Uh, well, we could go build these. We could go spend months building them, and let's say we all succeed, and then we'll find out in a year that one idea was better than the other. But I think that's a funny mindset. The reactive mindset is funny. Why don't you just be proactive? So why don't we look at all three of our ideas and then say, okay, there's different types of attribution: marketing attribution, there's product attribution, user attribution, there's sales attribution. And so from sales attribution, I could take your all three of these ideas and I could go meet with our top sellers. So President's Club, people that crush it, really, really good. And I share the three innovations and I even mock them up so they look real. And I ask, can you sell these? And the issue you need to break down is sometimes product will get credit for all features, and you really want the seller to admit that this would be a top 3 close reason on an account. And if your innovation isn't in the top 3 close reason, then I'm not going to give you sales attribution, because the seller's going to be like, yeah, it's not going to make a difference for me on closing that account. So not to belabor the point, but there's different ways we could actually fail this week. We could, even better, we fail before we build. We realize, I love your idea. I get it on the whiteboard. I think we could build it. Marketing doesn't think it's marketable. We can't have a webinar around it for lead gen or some partnership co-marketing stunt. Sellers say they can't sell it. And we talked to the customer advisory board, and users said they won't use it. And that, how great would that be to find that out within, a couple weeks, and you haven't even rolled up your sleeves yet? And innovation groups don't think like that. It's nerds in a room. They lack customer empathy. This is just kind of a general statement in the industry. Not everyone's that way.
Yeah, and it does cost money. It is risky time to time, right? Because you have so many competition out in the market. Research and development, could be a risky proposition. However, we're seeing lots of use cases where I think when we were discussing, home IoTs, right? IoT device, and futuristic things like Iron Man and Jarvis, right? We love talking about movies here, by the way. We love talking about Star Trek. I love talking about Star Trek because Star Trek is that what you said about 10 years ago, how you would make fiction, and then 10 years later, you have to kind of say, well, that's not fictional enough. That's happening, right?
Yeah.
I love that. That's how you know when you watch sci-fi, you're not, really just watching something and forgetting it. You're sitting there waiting for it to happen, right? When I'm watching sci-fi, I'm just like, well, enough time has passed. Where's that flying skateboard? Like, how come we don't have that, right? Those kind of questions I think you hear a lot from Back to the Future type of movies. But when it comes to Star Wars and Star Trek or other sci-fi type of movies, I lean into Star Wars because Star Wars has nanotechnology. Star Wars talks about AI. Star Wars talks about quantum, as in using mycelium theory to travel through space, right? Using mushrooms to
Yeah.
travel through space, which is mind blowing, right? So when it comes to these use cases, like some of the sci-fi stuff that we think is sci-fi in 2022, what do you think is going to become reality in 2025? Like, what are some of the things that you are seeing on the horizon that you're like cheering on? You're like, man, this coming, it's coming down the pipe. We just don't have it yet.
I think we still have big breakthroughs that have to happen in AI. So people are talking about the 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 Turing test it's not a sufficient test to gauge if AI is reaching human levels
I
of
love that.
generalization.
I love
Um,
that.
but you don't have to fault Turing for it, because when he came up for it, it was very profound. It was he is a genius of his time. But and people are talking about these Turing test replacements now, and I think a lot of the alternatives, honestly, are disappointing because I'm a big fan of working backwards. So if you realize, oh, this new Turing test that you're proposing, I think one
Mm.
of them, I forget the name of it, but they're essentially saying that a super intelligent AI should be able to watch a show like Seinfeld, and it should be able to comprehend everything that's happening. So it understands the characters, it knows what they're doing, it's keeping track of stuff. But the problem that you run into with AI, these big network systems, is they're really good at mimicking. So they could pull off a parlor trick. I would argue that AI could do all of that. AI could watch movies eventually, whether it's 5 years from now, 10 years, or 20, definitely by 20, and it comprehends everything. It's not on par with us. It's not even close. That is not, you're not going to have the singularity from that. And I think there there are better ways to think about it, I think. And
Right.
so we have some breakthroughs we're
Love
missing.
that. Yeah. Love that.
This might seem, I I think it's a good experiment. So I like getting to the very end of the story. So the very end of the story is, um I made the singularity last night. Like, promise, I'll swear on anything you want me to swear. Like, I'll, whatever consequence you want to come up with. I made the singularity last night. But don't worry, it's randomly initialized, meaning it's dumb right now, and it's going to start consuming some experience. And that experience is a webcam hooked up to it in my kitchen. So it's not mobile, it can't move, and it's only input. It can't have anything going out. And we can actually have a debate about what this would do, because we would all agree it's better than me. It, not on day zero, but on a year, it is better than me. And so,
That's
what
right.
can it do? Well, it has perfect memory recall. So, if you show it a sequence and refeed it through, it would know back in time exactly when that happened. Things that a human would not be able to do. Um,
That's right.
and then attention to detail. And then if you added different objects, it'll have a pretty good spatial understanding of the environment. But I think search is something that's often missing in AI discussions, but one of the things that I think is often missing, it's showing up a little bit more, it's this concept of novelty seeking. So this singularity, I come down in the kitchen in the morning, I cook eggs and I eat them. Eventually, AI is so good it can predict how many eggs I might eat that day. Am I going to have two? Am I going to have four? I'm going to have three. It's actually better than I am at anticipating, or better than another human observing me, what I'm going to do. But honestly, I'm quite boring. AI is bored out of its mind. This singularity in a jar is bored out of its mind. But the day my mother-in-law comes over, it's almost like if there were pupils on this thing, it would be the most interesting thing. Or like
Right.
if a dog came over, it hasn't seen this before, and when the dog leaves, it's going to be thinking about it. It's going to be thinking about it and daydreaming. And I'm
Right.
not trying to personify it, but that is a constrained singularity. And I think the more we start thinking about that, we realize the gaps we have today.
Yeah. How do you get to that level of AGI, artificial general intelligence, even though it sounds sci-fi like? I don't think people will sit there and say, you know, let me keep using computers that are just memory based. Like it has no imagination. It's not able to engage that memory that it saves and collects and add intelligence, which is imagination into it, right? That ability to say, what's possible here? Because that's the kind of computers we have today. We have this decision tree that computer goes through, and then on the backside just goes through a bunch of questions and then says decision tree says yes or no, and then on the backside it decides what yes or no means, and then just does that operation over and over. Well, we already have that. We've mastered it. So not to have this Jarvis like AI, which will use natural language processing using multiple models of like, hey, look, I have a model inside of me that is built just to identify an animal and what kind of animal it is. And just from the wagging of the tail, I know some details about that animal. So if that animal was a deer that broke into your house versus a dog, I know about that dog and the deer. I know about,
Mm.
your family came over. It is a family that came over, not a stranger who's stealing your stuff from your kitchen, right? So these kind of the possibility, like I think you're talking about reverse engineering. Like Alan Turing said, most human like that even a human cannot tell that's not a human, that's a machine that's actually making those decisions. Well, I think he's kind of saying that thing like, reach for the moon, reach for the stars, at least you will end up in the moon, right? I think Alan Turing's statement is perfectly fine. It gives us a high inspiration to get to, and for us not to reach for that star, at least for the moon at this point. By the way, I just want to throw this out there. White House is talking about going to the moon, and I love that idea that they're actually talking about living in the moon and extracting in the
Oh,
moon.
having a moon base, that's an important
Moon
part
base.
for,
Yeah,
I want to
yeah,
be
if you
on the
want to go to
dark side of
Mars.
the moon.
I saw your shirt, Pink Floyd. Love
So
it.
I think that just came out today or yesterday. The serious talk, right? But point back to that, the inspiration of it. Like, if you're reverse engineering, like we have so many IoTs at home right now that are collecting all this data, but this data, instead of serving us well, it's serving somebody else's ability to say, like, how do I sell this data, right? I think that's
Yeah.
fine. I think selling data is up to a certain point is fine. But when it starts serving us, I think it will be total revolutionary. That Jarvis, like from Iron Man, oh my goodness, I'm like, please let me see this in 3 years, not 10 or 15, because I want to be able to grow into Jarvis. Like, as in, I want to be young enough to say, like, by the time I'm 70, Jarvis is like literally my best friend,
Well,
rather than
it,
being introduced to Jarvis like when I'm 65 in an elderly home care.
well, one of the things I've said, which I think aligns with what you just said, Jarvis being your best friend. I've mentioned online that um, I will be alive to have AI get to a point where the most engaging conversations of my life will be with AI. So think about you, and you engage with intelligent people, people on podcasts, people in industry, and we've read different books, and we have, some of us like philosophy. We might have debates about science, religion, the mind, etc. But you have an opportunity to have a Jarvis conversation with something that has the wealth of knowledge. It knows everything about everything, and if it has stateful memory, it is learning things about you. And so, one of the biggest profound breakthroughs would be, um, I've got a, I took in graduate school, I studied chemical engineering, and I was also learning physics. So I took a graduate level physics class that kicked my ass. And I have a physics book that's this thick, and it has like the wealth of knowledge of what we know about general relativity. It is so hard to read. It's
Right.
like it's just pulling to, like, just to read page by page and try to understand it. If I have a AI that has the wealth of knowledge, it can actually communicate with me the way I need to hear things. And so think of all the books you've read. There's some books you read where you're like, oh my gosh, I wish there was a different author writing about this topic. And so that's really exciting because we will consume knowledge that much faster. If I can have it taught to me at the fifth grade level, then I can always level up. Now I'm ready for the PhD level, but please start at the fifth grade level and let's build.
Yeah, I think, look, for me, the excitement is that if you have Stephen Hawking in front of an AI, and AI is looking at Stephen Hawking and saying, like, I will adjust my level of conversation here because I'm talking to Stephen Hawking, right? I know
Yeah.
about Stephen Hawking. But when it comes to the fifth grader, I'm able to actually adjust, right? Adjust with a digital, say, a video that I can create just off of all the information from the internet, right? Right now, I have to sit there and wait for Coursera to come up with a course, or Udemy to come up with a course, or somebody in the YouTube just in general put out a video for me to watch so I can understand what this new knowledge I want to learn about physics, right? So I think education AI is super near dear to my heart. I think home IoTs is one of the devices because I live in home all the time. But when it comes to education AI, I know I cannot learn as fast as other people. I know that, right? It's very frustrating for me to, like, when I was trying to learn code, oof, boy, I wish there was an AI that was just like, hey, look, I'll help you, right? Like literally coaching me and mentoring me. But it's understanding the ability of me, right? As in, it understands me. So that way, if I'm neurodivergent, if I have some sort of specific ways that I want to learn, it's able to create content for me specifically, and I don't have to wait for a publisher to put out a PDF file for me to read through, right? Or publish a book for me to read through. These
Yeah.
kind of AIs are actually being worked on right now, and I think it's super exciting what you just said, because if we take that back to the business knowledge management earlier, as in your talent, they come and go, but you have no way to continue their talent into the next levels of hiring, or for your organization to continue with those knowledge. Think about that. Like, if we start with education AI and put that into the business knowledge, now that business knowledge continues itself. So when you onboard somebody new who's new to your organization, now you're able to tell them through their way of learning about what they need to know about your organization. So as a CEO, you can you can lose people, but you'll always continue to manage this
Well,
knowledge that other individuals have left or took with them in brain, but in AI, it's already saved for the next person to take over.
and that's the holy grail for business, because if they can have this oracle of worker knowledge where it's pooling it together, then that doesn't leave. But it's also, you can upskill new employees that much faster by
That much
having,
faster.
and they each have a digital assistant. There are some funny AI ethics is interesting because when you have this Jarvis system that's interacting with you, there are concerns that show up pretty quickly. And so the most triggering concern that I give people: imagine if your Alexa was stateful. So I've got 3 young kids. They interact with it every day. It reads them books. I love it. As a parent, I love it. If that Alexa had a memory, where now I'm overhearing a conversation where it's saying, "How was school today, Sally?" And Sally says, "Oh, it was hard. Billy was mean again." And if Alexa is stateful and says, "Oh, that Billy's always mean," we would agree on this interview that, well, that it's just silly. It's not conscious. It's not it just, but the fact that it's stateful, it can begin to develop a personal connection where now let's pretend that the personal connection is pretty engaging for that child, and the firmware is reset in 2 years, then the child will experience grief and loss. But the same thing could happen to, there's that movie Her that had a lot of attention that was, some
Right.
people thought was way over the top, but I would argue, I actually said something online that was a little darker where I was explaining to people this concept that you could engineer your own personal grief event. So I could engineer a chatbot that's stateful, witty, personality. I interact with it on a regular basis, and then within a couple years, I'm trying to get it to a point where I've determined I have an emotional connection, and then I remove that entity. And and that's what's so frustrating about that, because you as a human, you're smart enough to know there's no scenario where you should experience grief, but we've already experienced grief with objects. Like if you've had a car that you've loved, if you've had other things, you sell that car, you're sad. You're,
No,
you're
I
sad for it.
no, I've actually I've already experienced that. I started developing a generative AI, Stable Diffusion, version
Mhm.
1.4 and 1.4x. And as soon as I started developing it and training the model, and just having gaining knowledge, understanding more about generative AI, I started because of the fact that it's giving me something. I'm human. It's giving me art, something that, and depending on who you are, it takes hours to develop or write or create, months, years, and then it's doing it on the fly, and you're like, this is really cool. So then there's a new version of Stable Diffusion being released, right? And so I'm looking at my laptop and I'm like looking at it, I was like, I've already put in so much work into my AI and training
Right.
it and trying to get, and I know I know the fact that I look at it, I was, wait a minute, I know that it's not alive, of course, but it's given me so much satisfaction. And it's given me, like, I love art. So I've created a lot of generative AI with Van Gogh, Rembrandt, all the artists, and I've been and actually even developed our logo for our podcast recently, and but the story comes to, I have to upgrade my AI to the new version, and I don't want to do it because for some reason I feel attached to what I've already trained. I've
Oh,
got an
that's
attachment
funny.
to my model now, and I don't want to change it because it's like, okay, I know what happens when you upgrade, when you patch things. As an engineer, I know what Apple does. I know what everybody. I know what, and I don't want to patch it. I want to keep my AI the way it is because I'm attached to it. My buddy,
It,
that's Bob.
it's like having a pet. So you
Yeah,
have a second pet, but you're not going to get rid of your first pet.
mm,
Right.
Um,
exactly.
yeah,
So I have to install Stable Diffusion on another system just so I want to keep my AI happy.
yeah.
As far as I see it. You
Well,
know.
some I think you bring up an important point that, so I'm thinking now that grief is always present. So you don't need an intelligent entity to cause grief. Just like if you had a favorite pocket knife, if I take it away, you're going to grieve that. You'll have grief for that. But I think for humans, there are levels of grief that we enter being a parent, being a sibling, being a spouse. That unfortunately, to live a life of love means you are likely to experience a life of extreme sorrow and extreme grief, at least at some point in your life. And I think for most people, they sign up for that. They'd
Yeah.
they'd rather live that life than be a selfish. individual that is completely siloed with no meaningful love connections with anyone.
I think there's a common theme, and I love it. I love everything we're talking about here. The common theme that I bring it up with is like, by the way, I do these presentations on a weekly basis, and I do it for free, and I talk about space and time. Right, everything we know has a space and time behind it. So if it's IT, how does time relate to that? Everything IT is being built to save us more time. Right. If we can do it faster, that means we get to do other things. Not that we have more time in our hand, but we reduce the amount of time it takes to get something done. And that's what IT is so relevant in our lifestyle today in 2022, right? Nobody's thinking about like, hey, let's just go back to the good old days of 100 years ago, right? It's doing something for us which is time saving. And if I may, I want to stitch all this business case, education, and the emotion, the grief that we're talking about with time. As in business, you save time by not training somebody for next 6 months to get them up to speed about your business because you just hired them and your last talent left, you weren't able to retain them. So your knowledge management continued. You save time. Instead of 6 months, you showed them 6 days through AI videos and AI PDF knowledge or AI quizzing, AI's ability to, teach somebody tailored to that person you just hired to teach them about your business process very, very fast, rapidly. And they're able to do things amazingly in the seventh day, right? Without resting. So I'm just kidding about that one. So now you go to the education, same thing. Instead of wasting kids days in life or 8 hours a day, they have to study this topic. Well, how about in 8 minutes, you're able to watch a video and take a break, go play, and come back and study for 80 minutes on a book, and then blah, 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 blah. And instead of 8 hours, you are able to cover the same topic in minimal amount of hours. I'm not going to put a time into that. But the kids, they're able to do more now, right? Just like IT allows adults to do more, the educational AI will allow the kids to do more, play more, do more, and not be stuck to the chair and a table for 8 hours learning physics, right? And then I go into the grief part of it. Think about a time saving, like as in we have generational understanding of how a grief process works. It's a long process. You have to go through the process of, accepting it, getting angry about it, being depressed about it. It's like a 12 stages of grief, right? But what if there's an AI that's able to, give us that therapy that we need with the right type of questioning? As in, there's AI that Microsoft uses in China, which has about, I think, 115 some million people already engaged with it since 2015, right? There's people are just talking to this AI, and this AI is able to, ask you pointed questions like something that you're most likely your friends wouldn't, but your psychologist might. Like that middle level kind of questioning that is you're able to engage and say like, I'm having a bad day today. What should I think about, right? And this AI is able to point around that and say like, these are the kind of things that I will ask you, and then all of a sudden your perspectives are changing because you're thinking about answering questions. Now, what happens if you don't grieve for month after month, but you're grieving actual the right amount of time, say on a daily basis, you're able to grieve through for a week, right? But your outcome is much better because you're much more energized because previously without AI, you would grieve for months, but at the end, it didn't take you anywhere higher. Like you weren't more productive, you weren't more focused, you weren't back to yourselves. Like, some part of you just left and you could not recuperate from that. I just want to throw that out there because, like, if you start thinking about time, you do a whole lot better with AI because what you want to do is advocate for these kind of AIs that are saving a lot of time, not just for a business or as a community, but as a human experience. Like, these human experiences are all about saving time. Once you save time, you get to do more. Once you save time, you innovate better. If you save time, you get to spend time with your kids. You raise better kids, actually. Like you have a generational differences that you see as you save more times. And I'll stop right there.
Well, maybe real quick, a quick comment on the time thing. So humans have 2 to 3 billion heartbeats in a lifetime.
Oh, yeah.
Not that it's just not that you have a cap, but essentially that's what we get. I also like to think that we have a certain discrete number of thoughts. So if I'm going to spend 10 hours reading emails and writing emails, I could spend 10 hours doing innovation with you or jumping into the generator work. That sounds really, really fun. And I'd rather do that. But it also brings up this theme of mental health and mental evolution through, hopefully we get more and more control the older we get with our cognitive cycles. So, for example, if someone says something to me that offends me or pisses me off, if I'm thinking about that for hours, that's robbing me of doing something I actually want to do, having a new novel idea. And so, one of the things that really adds a lot to life is there. It's almost like the spice of life is comes in the creative, to paint, to do music, to do storytelling, poetry, cooking. Like there's so many creative things that I think everyone should partake in this space if we have time, because I think it's what it means to be human. The answers are not clear; they're more in the gray. It's not black and white thinking.
If I can add another topic to discuss with anybody, especially executives, right? That's, you mentioned, CEOs have to keep up with payroll, CEOs have to keep up with, keeping the company going for the next 5-10 years. They all boil down to decisions. So just like heartbeat, in a human brain, we make about 30 some thousand decisions a day, give or take. 30 some thousand decisions. And that, not to say, somebody who does all Olympics versus somebody who sits on the couch, watches TV all day. They're two different people making two different numbers of decisions. No, everybody's making about, give or take, the same amount of decisions, right? 30,000 or 30,000, 35,000 decisions a day, right? But not all of them are buying red Ferraris, right? Some of them are, as minute as like, did you pay attention to your breath that you just took right now, right? That's a decision. So this decision making capabilities that we have, which gives birth to predictability, as in we are able to predict many things because we've been making decisions as a human being as long as we've been alive. This decision making is where AI will will provide so many support to us, right? As in, once you're talking about grieving and having that grieving process, making changes in perspective, those perspectives is based on your ability to make decisions, right? AI is just a tool that's in front of you or around you that is able to guide you through that process, but your decision is still with you, right? And I think that's important to think about. If you were to assist yourself to a technology that you build for yourself to help you make better decisions in business or better decisions in local politics or governmental level, or say, just the United Nations, whatever the case is. If you want to, do you want to go to war, do you not want to go to war? If you do go to war, what kind of decisions do you make? That decision intelligence, that decision science behind it, is my core uh, interest in machine learning, my core take on everything machine learning. Like if you're talking about machine learning and I sit down with you and we don't talk about decision science, I might leave that room because you're just talking about mathematics here. You're talking about things that I'm not really good at, right? Talking about codings and programmings. I'm not the best coder programmer. I just kind of have like, over the surface understanding of it. I've taken boot camps on 5 languages. But when it comes to decision, so time is one aspect of it. So you have to make a decision about that time. What kind of time are you trying to save? Right? What sort of decisions will you make in the future? What sort of decisions that you make today, that if there was an AI as a third leg, as in you are the decision maker and you have a team of decision makers around you, like CFOs, CIOs, and the rest of your organization that helps you with those make those decisions. And you have a third component that is AI based decision maker that's able to say, you guys are making this decision. This is an AI decision. How do we compare and contrast our decision making capabilities? And if you're developing that tool over time for, say, next 5 years to keep testing that decision making capability for your organization, be it local government or local nonprofit organization, whatever the case is, that decision making capability that AI will have, I think is super important to focus and look at, because that is something to give us a perspective and save us more time rather than going down a rabbit hole of saying, okay, let's just make this decision without really having any decision intelligence behind it.
And just that there's a process to escape the process. So if you can augment it, you can add decisions where you're kicking out low confidence decisions to a human queue, but then eventually you get to all decisions are AI. And that might sound scary where, oh no, every human attached to this process got let go or fired. But
Right.
my personal experience has been there's always a new process. And I think one of the themes in my career is if you fight as hard as you can to automate your current job, you'll find out that it's impossible to be eliminated. Like there's always a new job. So
That's true.
if you eliminate your current job through automation, especially if you're the one tip of the spear doing it, there will
Mhm.
always be a new job. Um,
Yeah, that's the
I,
human in the loop, the subject matter expert that has to stay with that AI in order to have that AI sustain and scale itself over time, right? So I think that's very important that when we talk about a workforce adopting an AI, the workforce have to have the mindset to say, how does this AI augment or assist me in my workspace for the workforce, rather than somebody singularly deciding that, I have this giant workforce that I just want to get rid of, right? Two different outcome. When there's a workforce that engages in developing and designing this AI, the workforce will decide, no, this AI will have to augment us from doing repeatable, redundant, or dangerous missions, dangerous tasks, versus, the other side of it is that, hey, I'm the CEO and I will say, I just want to get rid of my workforce completely and have an AI replace them, right?
Oh
Two
my
different
God.
outcomes. So I think human in the loop, this understanding of Alan Turing, Institutions of London, that understanding that, subject matter experts needs to be involved in developing this AI. So not only do we develop a ethical AI full of privacy concerns and safety concerns and security concerns, but this AI is not creating a social tension that is very easy to avoid, if in my opinion.
well,
Yeah, I'm just having like flashbacks of different movies all of a sudden. iRobot and iRobot's the one that kind of jumps out. Everything we're describing is exactly what the movies, at least the premise is of that movie. And a movie of course is it's all subject to the writer. But at the end, what it comes down to is we we don't mind the help. You know, having a R2D2 or a or a Data. In Star Trek, Data was awesome. Data could have ran the whole show. We didn't need Captain Kirk or anyone else. Data could have been it, or was it the original Star Trek? It was Spock. Spock,
yeah.
Spock could have done everything, and Captain Kirk could have just we could have just got rid of him, you know, and then the future would have been better. But to have that AI, that voice of reason, is scary to me. It sounds great. Sounds great. The perspective sounds great. I'm always a, I'm a pessimistic optimist, if that makes any sense. you know, I really don't believe that we can come up with things that are always going to change things the way we want to change things, and the pain's going to come over time, and eventually we may get there. But I just think that, of course, I think AI is fantastic, and I'm being negative, but to be able to trust an AI at some point to make decisions for us, oh man, that's a future to look forward to. You
Well,
know?
some decisions you desperately want it, like heart disease, hospital data. Like I to celebrate the physician that can catch a 1 in a million disease, which was the old school way of thinking. I don't want that. Like I want that in partnership, but I would much rather have an AI system that has 100 million or 8 billion patients of experience. And
That's right.
now, when your kid or spouse is sick or you're sick, it is going through the wealth of knowledge, global wealth of knowledge, to decide. Um, there's a key thing that happens with healthcare research, or maybe research in general. In the past, the human has an idea. So let's say we're all medical researchers. I would say, I've got a really good idea. I make a proposal, internal review board. I can go through this process, and I'll determine in a few years if it was a good idea. Maybe we'll do an FDA trial or something. And I'm oversimplifying it, but in the data, live in the data, as patients are coming through, think of like the Vioxx lawsuits. AI should have automatically figured that out. AI should start having the light bulb ideas. So we are all asleep, and AI is reviewing the experience and finding new topics and saying, "Oh, this is really interesting. I'm going to kick off a full blown study in the data." And then you come in as a researcher, and last night AI did 5 unique innovations, and you're reviewing them or testing them.
Woo. It's giving me a goosebump right now. Like, here's lucky. Look, I mean, for me, I'm with you. I'm there. But the reverse engineering from that, and part of the fear, reverse engineering that to right now is to say like you got to start today to build that pat AI, so that way that AI will go through the errors, right? As in, the errors are the future. Error is not something that we should not have. Error is the future. So having that error and reducing that error over time, so that way you have high accuracy and most confidence, right?
Hmm.
Least amount of error, most confident. So if you don't have that starting today and 5 years down the road, you're like, look, Microsoft just handed me this AI and I have to trust it today. That's where you don't want to be. Where you want to be is to say, I've built this AI for last 5 years. I know every decision it has made for last 5 years every single day.
Hmm.
Now, at this point, I don't even realize it's next to me making decisions or helping me making decisions. Or if I look to the left and say, like, hey, Pete, what you got going on? Pete says, this is my decision. And I look to my right and I see the AI, like, AI, what you got to say about me and Pete's idea about what decisions we're about to make? Right? That's a difference in that 5 years of having that AI to say, like, I trust my AI just like I trust Pete. But at the same time, I always ask both of them because now I can combine two sets of data, right? Two sets of data, which is one human intelligence, one artificial intelligence. And that artificial intelligence is not a buddy of mine, not a pet of mine. Like, if you get emotionally attached to it, I get that. But at the same time, that this buddy of yours or pet of yours or just this artificial intelligence has the data set that it needs, right? It has developed that decisions based off of those data sets that you fed it, right? Whew, exciting stuff,
No,
man.
I, I trust me. I'm a technologist. I love it. But you know what's the greatest part of being part of where we're at now is we get to see all this play out. And like say for example, the generative AI discussions. You have people that are true artists that have spent their whole lives, practicing their craft, and they have the probably the best hands for creating the finest lines or the finest detail, and all of a sudden you have this generative AI that's coming in and just smashing it and just creating these just unrealistic, incredible images, and it just flipping the world inside out.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to it strikes another market or another. Just like we got Jarvis and we have Siri, that was a big change. And all of a sudden, generative AI, that's the big one now. There's companies like oh gosh, how did he get up here? Oh, sorry, here's my buddy. Ah,
Hey, buddy.
hey, he decided to be part of the show. And this is at some point getting to the point, and he actually sums it up for me. Is it sounds like to me at some point we're gonna be replacing man's best friend with AI being our new best friend because they're gonna be the one that helps us grow. It'll be that because you see it now. Kids have these little oh gosh, there's dogs everywhere. We have AI that kids are they're getting as infants now that teach them how to communicate, talk, and that becomes
Right.
their friend. The little dogs, the little AI pets, and the kids learn to communicate not with a person but with an AI, and that's going to evolve. They'll have that friend for the rest of their life, somehow suggested, whether it be through a device or through some kind of, R2D2. We're gonna have friends soon. I want to see that happen though at some point because NLP is right on the edge, and like you said, reaching that singularity, getting to the point where we feel that that thing is actually alive. I think that's just a matter of perception. You know, do we get communication? Do we get what we want out of it, like a feeling, a emotion? We can get that. We get that now from our phones. People are stuck on their phones. How many likes do we get? So I'm just thinking, artificially, we're not far from having that best friend be a bigger part of our life. It's just a short turnaround from that point. But Sorry, I digress. My animals
No,
are all
the
around me.
generator discussion is really interesting because it's extremely disruptive. So you talked about potentially if you used a designer before for some of your marketing, and if you can just request, like we're getting there quickly. There in a few years, why would you use a designer if you can just have a request and have 100? Because one of the things that you can do, if I have 100 generation art forms come up on the screen, I can actually mate them. So I can say, well, this and this and this, and it will just keep doing these cycles. And so you in the room can quickly produce something that would have taken a creative couple days. And then I just got headshots done for the recent job announcement. And in the future, why would you use a photographer for headshots when you can just throw a Pinterest board and say, well, here's my social media. You obviously can find what I look like. And even low resolution, you can do super resolution with enough photos. And here's a Pinterest board, and it'll give you headshots that would have cost you $1,000 to go spend half a day. And so, and same with modeling. Like if you're in the modeling industry and you focus so much on your look that is unique or it's been valuable to you, why would I spend $10,000 on a photo shoot with a professional model when I can just make a request based on? It also opens up hyper personification. So having a single model with a single shoot for advertising is not as good as hyper personification, where I can have a million models that are targeted to that audience in that setting using generative methods.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was
anybody who's
training my model
listening,
today. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
anybody who's listening, got to look up the model that they've been making for the last 3 years. She does not look AI whatsoever. There's a video clips of her. There's things that she's doing, this jogging around and drinking out of water bottles. Wow, all AI. That is not a person. That person does not exist. And I'm looking at him like I'm looking for ways to see where does she go wrong in her movements. But she's a model, and that's why they built her, so she can be a model for a product. And boy,
Ay, ay, ay.
Ay, ay,
ay,
ay, ay, ay.
ay, ay.
Yeah, wait till we get into okay. If we're not even talking about robotics, we're not even talking about the world is changing quickly, and the opportunities for you to design different types of artificial intelligence and the different systems, from there's sensory, there's voice recognition, there's natural language processing. There's a lot of different areas, Tesla with the self-driving cars. At some point all these neural nets will mesh together, and I'm wondering, I'm trying to figure out when it'll happen. Is it going to happen in 50 years? How when does an actual neural net really start to come out? What do you think? When do you, because it's hard to say, because right now we got Fortune 500 companies and they can't agree on one thing. So when do you think there'll be one supreme neural net that kind of stands out from the rest?
Well, I like the idiot droid that goes to school, so that Jarvis in a jar, if I can successfully teach it to speak English, so I'm going to make it more complicated. It's not a camera. I now add a microphone and a speaker, so it can do like babbling, it's cooing, it learns to speak English, and eventually it speaks more words than, a 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 5-year-old. But we'd all agree it's not conscious. It's pretty impressive. And then eventually it goes to college, and it's a droid now, but it's an idiot droid. I had to like ask the dean for a special favor to have it go to college on, you know, for a publicity stunt. But then one day it comes home and it says, "I published 10,000 research papers in physics today."
Right.
And then that's an example of a breakout event where we would all be laughing about my idiot droid that is still, it's not conscious. It is pretty cute and fun. But the day that happens, we realize as builders we've lost control. And so so I think that would, but maybe someone, you have these models that keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, GPT-3 or these generators, DALL-E 2, and I think they're always going to be a little bit misleading on their capabilities. It's that if you think about the singularity, it's a magic trick. So right now, I'd say 5 or 10% of the population can be tricked. Like I could trick my parents, given funding and time, and I think we could, anyone here on this call could trick our parents. But over time, they'll start increasing, and eventually, we'll get to this other side where there's a fierce sliver of society that will never ever agree that that is on par. And it doesn't even matter if scientifically all three of us agree. There will always be a fraction of society, and so you'll never get consensus.
that goosebump has leveled up to chill at this point because you're talking about graduating AI from university. Well, with all that said, man, look, my excitement started with ay 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 because there's so much use case. But now that I got chill, I gotta say ay 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 ay. Have a good day, man. It's been an awesome, awesome conversation about so many use cases. Ben, one thing I must ask is please come back because we have to continue this conversation for sure.
Oh yeah. Well, we haven't talked about the purpose of life or happiness, depression, anxiety. Um,
Not on the
that
first
would be
date.
fun.
Like, not on the
No
Yeah,
first date.
sex,
We'll
drugs, or
do it on the second
alcohol,
date.
or rock and roll. So we missed all those good
I
subjects.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to go deeper because I think that personal assistant. It's one thing to keep track of your keys and to help you and give you advice and help you buy presents for your spouse or
Right.
kids. It's another thing when it starts coaching you on maximizing your purpose. It knows you're going to die,
That's right.
but it wants you to have less depression, less anxiety. When someone pisses you off, have less. You can have emotional release, but bring it back to center quickly. Have more empathy for people. Like there are probably some themes we could agree on that we all have our own lives and our own way to gauge them and score them, but there are some themes that most people would agree they would like to move on directionally. Like I would like to have more empathy. I would like to be, less upset, more in control of my cognitive cycles. If
That's
someone
right.
says something, I don't want it to spin too many times in my head.
So show us your excitement. Like what? How do you say ay 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 now?
Ay, ay, ay.
Ah, there he goes.
Ay,
Lucky.
ay, ay. Yeah. It'll be more of a song. It'll be us out in the desert around a fire with
Ah,
guitars,
AyAyAyAi.
celebrating the spice of life.
Lucky. How do you feel now?
Well, honestly, I had a few thoughts, but at the end, ay.
Lucky definitely
Yeah,
went down the hill. He was like, I started from the top of the mountain. But look,
yeah.
next time we come around, we'll talk more about philosophy if we have to. History. I love history. I love philosophy. I love conflict. I love conflict resolution, conflict management. There's just so much to talk about. I mean, we didn't even touch anything about military yet, right? That's just a whole
Hmm.
nother domain. But with that, Ben and Lucky, you have made me very happy today because this conversation has been awesome. Definitely something that I will want to follow up with and continue the conversation. With that, everybody, thank you for listening and have an awesome, awesome AI day.